Greetings, family. This is Cassandra-Floyd, formerly known as Iyapo, also known as the Rogue Black Girl, and I am back and quite excited to say that we are nearing the end of the light at the tunnel. At the end of the tunnel, we are today on chapter 50 of the reading of the Great Cosmic Mother. After this chapter that I will share with you today, we will have 2 chapters left. So that's exciting. While I mess with my hair, I love it, but it's like really loud and sometimes difficult and stuff. But anyway, yeah, so I'm excited. I started reading this book again. Hey, Yashara. Yashara, is that right? So yeah, I started reading this book in January live on YouTube, and I am finally nearing the end. So this has been deliberate. This is my second time actually reading this book live online. I did it in 2020 during the height of COVID. And I did it unfortunately on Facebook. And so I don't know if any of you have any experience, but like when you do stuff, your videos in Facebook can be a little, wonky. I think they do that deliberately. And so I decided I was going to do it again this year, but for good cause. Several people, after having participated in watching me read that book live on Facebook 2 years ago now, asked if I would facilitate a book club or a workshop on the book. So what I decided I was going to do was go ahead and read the book, the entire book, online first, and then after that, initiate the book club / workshop on this book. Now, some housekeeping things since we're nearing the end of this book. If you are on YouTube and you look at the description below, then you will see a link to the Facebook book club, if you will. What I am going to do is I'm using the Facebook as just like a point of reference, but what I am actually going to do is be facilitating the book club through Zoom. So what I'm doing is having people go to Facebook, express interest in the book club, and send contact information, and then that way. And also, I haven't deleted a lot of the information that I had posted in that book club at the beginning, which was going to be me facilitating the book club as a paid workshop. And so disregard that. Like I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it as free and open to taking donations, because it's going to be a walk that we do, right? So disregard that. I'll figure out how to take it down some other time. But anyway, go to Facebook, or you can just, IM me through IG or Facebook or whatever and say, yes, I'm interested in the book club. I'll get your email address, your contact information. That way, when I get ready, which is going to be in 2 weeks, in 2 weeks, I'm going to get ready to start doing the book club / workshop. That's how I'm going to facilitate it, as a workshop. So we will have like reading assignments, which is why I read the book online. I know we have busy lives. The book is as long as the Bible itself. And so I wouldn't expect realistically for people to read that entire book. Therefore, I did it. So when you want to participate in the book club, all you got to do is go to my YouTube page, and all of the chapters are numbered and labeled. And then that way you can listen to the chapter while you're driving or while you're washing your dishes or what have you, right? And then if you would like, then you can take notes in your book as we have these discussions. I will say, okay, we're going to have an assignment based on chapters 1 through 3. And for that assignment, as evidence that you read it or listened to it, so we can come into the space just to discuss, I want everybody to pose 3 questions, 1 to 3 questions about the chapters, and then we will engage that way. Okay. So that's one thing, housekeeping wise. Two, there are some other things that I have coming up in the works very, very soon, probably within the context of me facilitating this book as a workshop. So I want you to, keep up with me, keep in touch with me because, yeah, some shit is coming down the pike, exciting shit, but I don't want to be premature in its announcement. But yeah, I'm going to be making calls of people. I'm going to be challenging people to participate in what is happening. So if you have been keeping up for any time with me, then you know I just taught very recently a 7-week workshop on America's First Pluto Returns. I am still trying to figure out how, because that was a paid workshop, so it's not on YouTube. And so I'm trying to determine how I'm going to release that. Am I going to do like pieces of it? It was 7 weeks, 2 hours each week, paid workshop on America's First Pluto Returns, which we are still in and will be in until November of 2024. It is the game changing event of our lifetime. And the reading of this book, the book that I'm referring to, is The Great Cosmic Mother, Rediscovering the Religion of the Earth by Barbara Moore. I will also continue to say that in lieu of some more recent developments. But anyway, yeah, so there is this looming pressure and urgency that we're all experiencing, and and trying to cope with it the best way that we can without a lot of information being given to us about what it is we're experiencing collectively. I will be talking about this. So for those of you who do not know me, as the facilitator of the reading of this book and the subsequent workshop and book club, my name is Cassandra-Floyd, formerly known as Iyapo Ngina, also known as the Rogue Black Girl. I am a healer with a background, meaning a master's degree in traditional Chinese medicine and acupuncture, and bachelor's degree in alternative medicine, an additional bachelor's degree in professional health sciences, and an associate's degree in massage therapy with 16 certifications. Aside from the fact that I came from a long line of what most people would call root women, Southern Louisiana born Black women who had an extensive knowledge of midwifery and herbal healing. Also, I come from a line of witches, though they don't know themselves as witches, they know themselves as Christians, but these are seers, people who had prophetic visions. My father, my grandfather, my grandmother, his brothers, primarily on my father's side, but I come from two sides of very extraordinarily powerful people. And that's important to say. People should understand why I feel compelled to read this book, to lead these discussions, to be out in the world. I am an ordained minister. I am a 12-year devotee of Ifa. I am not a priest of Ifa. However, Oya sits on my head. Shango owns my heart. These things are important to say. I am a 26-year political activist with 8, more closely to 9 years of political affiliation with the African People's Socialist Party, also known as the Uhuru Movement. That is where I got my political and ideological training. Yeah, so these things are important to know. It gives you some frame of reference about who I am and why I feel I am an authority to be teaching anything to you. Okay, so yeah, and then yes, so that's important to say, and that's why I'm leading this discussion. I've been asked many, many, many times after the first time I read the book that to facilitate a workshop. So I'm going to do that. Now, there will be more information coming later on over the next couple of weeks as we round out finishing this book, and as I prepare to begin teaching the workshop and making this big announcement coming up in 2 weeks. So yeah, if you are tuning in through IG or through Facebook, please inbox me. Let me get your information. That way I can email you or send you information about what's coming down the pike, which is all very exciting. Okay. Now, to not belabor this any longer, for those that are just tuning in, we are reading chapter 50. You should know that if you don't have the book, you can, in the meantime, I still encourage people to buy the book. But in the meantime, you can Google Great Cosmic Mother PDF, and actually you can get a PDF where you can read the whole book online. And that way you don't get lost in what it is we're talking about until you can get the book and begin taking notes like you see I have in my wonderfully read book. All right. So, chapter 50 of the Great Cosmic Mother. Beyond the Male God and His Machine is the name of the chapter. Under Islamic law, virgins cannot be executed. So in Iranian jails, prison guards systematically gang rape young female prisoners sentenced to death, thus rendering them fit in God's eyes for execution. Pregnant women prisoners in some American jails, notably California Institution for Women, are routinely strapped to their beds at the ankles or wrists throughout their labor and childbirth. Under 24-hour surveillance, the enchained women are unable to move, turn over during sleep, or help themselves in the most minimal way to ease their labor pains. Though the woman in labor is not going to be, in anyone's opinion, a great security risk. Hundreds of young women are killed yearly in India in the notorious dowry deaths, in which a young bride is set afire by her in-laws as revenge for inadequate or incompletely paid dowries. The new bride is doused with kerosene and then ignited with matches. The new bride is doused, This act is usually performed by mothers-in-law, i.e. women do this to other women, in acts of stupendous greed or self-hatred, conditioned by religious ideas that define sons and males generally as spiritual beings, while daughters and other females are defined as income property. One of the most popular X-rated games before it was removed from circulation in response to protests from Native American and feminist groups was called Custer's Revenge, in which a naked General Custer scores points by raping bound Indigenous women. One of the most popular X-rated films ever made is the notorious South American produced Snuff, in which a live woman is raped, mutilated, and disemboweled before the camera. This film has been shown throughout the world, and its popularity has spawned many spin-offs in which the gang rape, torture, and murder of women and also children is simulated by actors, is not simulated by actors, but is really done while cameras roll. To provide sacrificial, quote, actresses for these films is a function of the global slave trade in women and young girls. Snuff has been shown in some American prisons, ostensibly to entertain male prisoners, many of whom we can assume were imprisoned for rape and killing women. In America alone, torture pornography films are $1 billion a year industry. They run the gaunt from Driller Killer, in which women's skulls are drilled into pieces, in which college women are cut. In which women's skulls are drilled to pieces, in which college women are cut to bits by a professor with a chainsaw. The distributor of the latter hopes it will become a cult film for kids. Despite organized protests of feminists worldwide, the production and scale of torture and pornography films, home videos, and video games continue to soar. With global distribution following patterns of global development. Listen. With global distribution following patterns of global development. A 1983 film called Make Them Die Slowly showed not only women, but Aborigines being tortured. the national secretary of the Moral Majority, lecturing in the early 1980s at Earlham College, a Quaker-affiliated school in Indiana, declared that the United States should have used atomic or hydrogen bombs to, quote, win the Vietnam War. Moral Majority and other fundamentalist American religious patriotic groups believe that God gave nuclear weaponry to America and that we have a moral right, indeed a moral duty, to use the weapon that God gave us, end quote. When new recruits are inducted into the Israeli Defense Forces, they are ceremonially handed one, a gun, and two, a copy of the Old Testament, in which God commands and justifies the righteous slaughter of thousands upon thousands of, quote, unbelievers. The biblical Old Testament is, is a historic record of massive holy war conducted in the name of God against Gentiles, and also in some cases against Jews, by Jews, and most of the mutilations and massacres in it, including those of pregnant women, children, suckling infants, are considered by its patriarchal writers to be the fulfillments of the will of Yahweh. In the Pentagon, group Bible reading sessions and prayer breakfasts are on the increase in the 1980s, or at least the Joint Chiefs of Staff are more openly, under President Reagan's administration, displaying their religious beliefs. At many prayer breakfasts conducted throughout America recently, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, John Vasey, has urged his audiences to enlist in God's army, while Admiral James Watkins, the chief of naval operations, declares in public speeches that the 1983 Beirut bombing that killed 241 Marines was the responsibility of the forces of the Antichrist. These 7 news items were not selected at random, nor do we consider them to be disconnected. They are 7 facets of a world ruled by a male God, or rather by a definition of God derived from 4,000 years of patriarchal ideological domination, in which countless daily acts of aggression, human degradation, and sheer ugliness not only occur, but occur inevitably as the acting out of basic patriarchal principles and premises. All these news items record the acting out of patriarchal ontology. The patriarchal, quote, Godhead of all major world religions is defined as 1, a God of righteous war, 2, a dominator of women, 3, a God of wealth and hierarchic power, 4, an imperialist God who controls vast resources of wealth and power by controlling the female body and its reproductive processes as exploitable property. 5, a sexually puritanical God who defines sex as unclean and evil and thus elicits violent pornography as the sexual punishment and exorcism of women. And 6, a God who thrives on policing and punishing life itself. The world's definition of God is the self-definition of humanity. The gods who rule us from above are simply mirrors in the sky, faithfully reflecting our own faces. The gods who rule us from within might represent deep truths of the mind and heart, or they might reflect the profound self-distortions of 4 millennia of ontological misperception. We do not know if a God is a true God or a false God until we see what kind of world is created in that God's image. When we look around today at the world generated by the male gods of patriarchal rule, we see warfare, degradation, suffering, and sadism on a scale such as the world has never seen nor will ever see again. For of course, if we do not end it, it will surely end us all. Nor is it the problem of blood, of Muslim blood, or nor is it a problem of blood, of Muslim blood or Hindu blood or Christian blood or Jewish blood or atheist communist blood, but a problem of ideology. If we embrace an ideology of justified holy war, we will be forever at war and inflicting war on others. If we worship a punitive God, we will forever be punished and punishing of others. If we believe in a religion that dualizes the human sexes into mutually hostile, dominating, and submissive categories of beings, then we, as sexual human beings, will be forever dichotomized and ravaged by hostility within ourselves and among ourselves, and we will inflict our internal alienation and ravagement on everything we see forever. Oh my God. Yo, let me just underline that really quick. Oh my God. Listen, if we believe in a religion that dualizes the human sexes into mutually hostile, dominating, and submissive categories of beings, then we, as sexual beings, will be forever dichotomized and ravaged by hostility within ourselves and among ourselves. And we will inflict our internal alienation and ravagement on everything we see forever. This is all very rudimentary, but once it has been set into motion as world machinery, every living thing on earth is entangled in its gears. All our functions become definitively embodied in its functions, and it's very hard for those living inside the machinery to stop the machine, because our lives and all their ontological terms have come to depend on the ongoing machinery in all its terms. Because as human beings, we not only worship our gods, we become them. The God humanity follows is the kind of humanity we are and will be. What kind of God do we want as our definition? Well, we will know the answer to this more clearly as we come to understand the kind of God which, for 4,000 years, has been defining all of us, has been imposing its definition on us human creatures, via the machinery of patriarchal, religious, economic, and military systems. Dang. Sorry. Military systems. Okay. The God of patriarchy, from the beginning, has been a God of war and economic exploitation. Incessant warfare and economic exploitation have characterized the 4,000-year history of this male God, a time span that is very brief relative to the 300 to 500,000 years of humanoid life on Earth, but still long enough to make us feel as a species that it has always been this way. Ooh. It is no surprise that the world of today, the apotheosis of patriarchy, is a world of war and money. What else rules us anywhere we go on Earth? The paradigm of continuous, large-scale war is the institutionalized dualism of the sexes into good spiritual males versus evil material females, i.e., male versus female is the first holy war. The paradigm of continuous, large-scale economic exploitation is the institutionalized control of female reproduction by a ruling male elite, i.e., male controlling female reproduction is the first boss controlling worker production, the first assembly line domination of human energy. In the modern world, we are told there are two very different and competing economic power systems. But in fact, they are ontologically the same, deriving from the same god of war and exploitation, from the same patriarchal definition of human life as a function of some larger abstract category, whether that category is God, the state, the marketplace. American-based private enterprise monopoly capitalism defines human beings. Defines human beings and all of nature as functions of the state, baby. What is the ontological difference? To define human beings as functions or exploitable means, rather than as sacred ends in and of ourselves, is to create, by definition, a perpetual state of war. Together, these two world machines, known politically as the US and the USSR, grind away as functions of each other, producing state economies and private economies in apparent or rhetorical conflict. Ooh! As apparent or rhetorical conflict, but in reality, subservient to one global, unified war economy, which in turn serves both and in which both collude. Come on. For perpetual war is necessary against mock enemies and against one's own people in order to maintain human beings in a perpetual condition of exploitable means rather than sacred ends in and of ourselves. This is why the patriarchal God begins and ends as a war god. To maintain himself in power, he must wage war against human life. His priesthoods, his sacred texts, doctrines, and dogmas exist to rationalize this horrific state of incessant warfare as man's spiritual destiny. His social and economic institutions exist to provide the continuous cannon fodder and spoils for continuous war, baby. Oh my God. A global god of war served by the global religion of money defines the human condition today. Our various nationalities, our sectarian beliefs, our local customs, our personal, our personal opinions may serve as individual definitions, but they no longer define the condition of the world in which global missile systems and global factory economic systems have rendered national, sectarian, local, and personal definitions merely as soporific, and, in fact, obsolete. All humanity today lives under one global God, the God of war, who is continuously empowered and enlarged by the religion of money. The arms race is now the major global economy. The world economy is now a war economy, with virtually all national military systems and military budgets taking precedence over all domestic economies and domestic budgets. World Priorities, a nonprofit American research organization, in their published World Military and Social Expenditures for 1979, found that developing nations with populations of 660 million people who couldn't afford basic subsistence were yet spending over $90 billion a year on military power. And this was 8 years ago. In 1979, according to world priorities, the world was investing 2,500 times more in the machinery of war than in the machinery of peacekeeping. 8 million children died in that year alone from hunger and illness related to malnutrition. America, the Earth's strongest military nation, had in 1979 over 25 million malnourished people and at least 10 million children who had never seen a doctor. In total for 1979, quote, in pounds per person, the world had more explosive power than food, end quote. And this was 8 years ago, before the arms race, quote, heated up again, before the resurgence of the Pentagon budget under the Reagan administration and the consequent leap into military spending in all other countries, before the terrible famines in Sudan, Ethiopia, and Bolivia, before the cutbacks in American welfare programs and the consequent diminishment of domestic priorities in governments worldwide. According to the most recent statistics, for every soldier on earth, the average military expenditure is $20,000 yearly. For every school-aged child, the average public education expenditure, the average annual public education expenditure is $380. For every 100,000 people in the world, there are 556 soldiers, but only 85 doctors per 100,000 people. For every $1 billion spent to provide 28,000 jobs in military goods and services, the same expenditure could provide 57,000 jobs in personal consumption industries and 71,000 jobs in education. As Ruth Legger Sivard, director of World Priorities, writes, quote, the vast development of problems of the 1980s, like the unbridled arms race, must be understood in human terms. It is not the world economy nor the national security that is in danger. It is the people. The modern world is painfully off balance, opulently rich in arms, poor in providing for the needs of human lives. It is this social deficit that represents the most urgent threat to world security. Spending for arms not only fails to meet these needs, it intensifies them. This is the ultimate irony of the search for security through invincible military power. It threatens the society it is intended to protect. In short, what the arms race means in human terms is that more people are condemned to die of hunger and of foul water, children to grow up retarded in body and mind, the special needs of the elderly to be neglected, people to live out their lives in fear and with hate. It is not only the deprived who suffer as a consequence. All of society is affected by the waste of human resources, end quote. But these are reasonable mortal words from a reasonable mortal woman. Looming over her, high as the sky, is a god, the war god. All the present day world is in the grip of psychic and material servitude to him. And if we review the past 4,000 years of human history, this makes perfect sense. Just as the underlying motivation of the Bronze Age patriarchy was profit through war, war on the female, war on nature, war on human labor, so the ultimate goal of patriarchy must be the same: the profits of war. For 4 millennia, war has been the factual source of patriarchal power. Through the mass terror, mass rape, and mass exploitation of war, through the wartime generation of mass hysterical energy, through the war-oriented manipulation of female reproduction through the mass conversion of human and natural resources via war into profits for the few, and social order, i.e., hierarchic role playing, organized repression and death for the many. The war machine has virtually created the world as we know it today, i.e., as the creator of our psychic and structural world. War is God. Oh my God. As both William Irwin Thompson and Paul Virilio have pointed out, the city began as a fortress. Virilio, an urban architect, claims that the city is a result of war, at least of preparation for war, that is, of large-scale patriarchal professional war, end quote. And gods generate not only worlds and social orders, but also belief in those worlds. Oh my God. Also belief in those worlds and social orders. A belief that overwhelms human reason. Oh my God. Oh my God. Ah, come on. Secular humanist liberals, and reasonable mortal women have always tended to underestimate the depth and the extent of the human male's identification with war as a God experience, as well as an experience of personal empowerment. It is not accidental that the government's social programs, public welfare, health, education, the environment, transportation, art and culture, etc., are identified as domestic and female, while the Defense Department's programs are always promoted as global and masculine. Nor is it coincidental that liberal male politicians who support the domestic programs are always being challenged to defend their genitals against charges of wimpiness and softness and bleeding heartedness. Ponder that last one. Before the 1984 elections in the United States, support of young men for the Republicans was at an all-time post-World War II high. According to a New York Times article summarizing pre-election poll results, young American males, and older males too, of course, identified with the image of power projected by Ronald Reagan. In particular, nationalistic warrior power represented by a tougher military posture and increased weapon spending vis-a-vis spending for soft domestic programs. One urban male professional was quoted as saying that at his workplace, the guys stick to Reagan primarily because they see the race as women versus men, with Reagan standing for the values of men, i.e., the patriarchal war god stands for and has created a social order that empowers men to the degree that it gives them power over women and therefore life. As for the ruling elites, to whom patriarchy has given manipulative power over both men and women, the war god has always been a profitable machine. Fueled by their money, it not only returns wealth manyfold, it also returns social order, patriotism being so often a repressed form of revolutionary energy. Oh my God. Ha. Patriotism so often a repressed form of what would be revolutionary energy. Oh my God. Social order allows the ruling elite to enjoy the profits of war in relative peace. This machinery has worked for us for 4,000 years. Why stop now? So say the owners of the machinery as they collect the profits. In the past, war has always been something the ruling elite felt it could control or manage via money and political clout. that the mushrooming of the Bronze Age war gods into a nuclear god of global war threatens their own continuance seems to be overlooked data or an hypothesis they refuse to deal with. The global war god now looms over them all, as well as over everything else on earth. By this ontological challenge, but this ontological challenge does not seem to be regulating the behavior of war financiers or the people engaged in weapons manufacture and sale, i.e., everyone underestimates the power of a God grown to global proportions in his material as well as his psychic manifestations. As further evidence of the logarithmic growth of various patriarchal war gods into the global god of war is the fact that the development of the world's male populations into primarily armies or military technicians or researchers of one kind or another has become the major global channel of all male energy. Oh my God. In the third world countries, the army has also become the major mode of male survival. While women sustain agricultural and craft work in many nations or struggle to keep themselves and their children alive in the bourgeoning refugee camps created by continuous war, males are able to obtain food and shelter only by joining the army, the National Guard, or other armed policing forces. Thus, the war god machinery perpetuates itself on three levels: that of belief, of profit, and of daily survival. As the patriarchal war god has become the global god of global war, the state of holy war has become global, inevitable, and continuous. As a Christian, Paul Virillo distinguishes between the historic idea of a just war and the fanatic pursuit of holy war. But in the age of nuclear technology, there is no room or time left, in his opinion, for a just war. All war today is fanatic and also technologically devastating. All war has the potential for rapid acceleration into total war. But to maintain itself in power, the patriarchal system must maintain the world in a continuous, chronic state of war of one kind or another. Holy war is all war, i.e., it is righteous war, self justifying. Whether the war is conducted between nations as classic warfare or conducted within a nation as a national guard or policing nation against the nation's own people hardly makes a difference anymore. Further, as Virillo underscores, it doesn't even matter if wars occur or don't occur on any large scale. It is the preparation for war that maintains the military in power by draining the social sectors of all resources, money, and will. Whether we are fighting, quote, others, fighting among ourselves, or just chronically getting ready to fight someone, it makes no difference anymore. We are effectively ruled by the God of war. We are effectively living and dying in a habitual and structural state of perpetual war. And what is the purpose or result of such a condition? As Virillo says, quote, unconsciousness is the aim of pure war. Listen, y'all ain't here. Unconsciousness is the aim of pure war. But as we know, or should know, consciousness is the aim of evolution. So the ultimate aim or effect of the patriarchal pursuit of profit through war is counter-evolutionary. On a mass scale, it seeks to drag us back to a state of oblivion before human consciousness even began. Oh my God. This correlates with the urge of patriarchal religion to force a human de-evolution back to the primate state by controlling human reproduction as though it were the same as mammalian reproduction, and by denying the fact of human female evolution into a unique state via the menstrual cycle in which sex and reproduction can be separable. Oh my God. Hold up. This female led evolution away from the primates, this female evolution away from the primates was, in a very real sense, the beginning of human consciousness as we know it, a consciousness which patriarchal religion has tried to reverse via control of female sexual and reproductive activity, and which the patriarchal war god is now seeking to destroy one way or another by forcibly maintaining the human species in a state of continuous war or continuous preparation for war. Um, let's see. Uh, we may ask, let's see, Sue bueno, Sue bono. I don't know what that means. Que bono. Anybody speak French? Well, we may ask, and the answer is ultimately no one. But the war machinery of the war god neither asks nor answers such questions anymore. It is entirely automatic. It just keeps turning, warring, preparing for war. Like the apocryphal Christ, it says only, quote, I have come to destroy the works of the female. Oh my God. I have come to destroy the works of the female. Jesus said that, by the way. And that is seen as all life, all of earth, and apparently all of human consciousness. The other face of the patriarchal God is economic exploitation. Economic exploitation and war, as we have seen, are two faces on one head, inextricably connected, just as the ancient shared work and celebration ritual groups of women were the original communalism, in which matrifocal cultures, men participated also for at least 300,000 years. So the Bronze Age patriarchal desire to control female sex and reproduction, and thus all human labor and production, was the origin of fascism. The American Heritage Dictionary of the English Language defines fascism as a system of government that exercises a dictatorship of the extreme right, typically through the merging of state and business leadership together with a belligerent nationalism. But throughout 4,000 years of patriarchal history, the state and business leadership have always been merged, and the merger has always been maintained in power by a belligerent nationalism, i.e., the war machine always in the service of the state and business interests, both at home and abroad. The only thing missing from this definition is the role of patriarchal religion, or a deified patriarchal ideology, in providing a divine rationalism or heavenly mystique for the fascistic apparatus. Y'all aren't hearing? Come on. Now, if we follow this definition, it is not too far-fetched to say that the history of patriarchy is the history of fascism. Come on. And that economic, let's see, and that patriarchal economics or economic systems have always been fascistic economic systems in which court, state, religious, military, and business ruling elites collude in mutual empowerment and power reinforcement to exploit human labor and all of Earth's resources, beginning with the exploitation of female reproductive labor and female creative communal labor in general. Historic revolutions in the West have effectively done little more than add new economic groups to the collusion, i.e., the 18th century and 19th century addition of the European bourgeoisie to the ruling elites of Europe, or the more complex 20th century addition of the Soviet political military elite to the fascistic power organization of the West in general. Oh my God. Oh my God. Woo! The wealth of the West, the wealth making economic system known popularly as Western free enterprise system, was built from the ground up as we know via brutalization of the working class, slave labor, and colonialism. 18th century laissez-faire liberal economics, now enjoying a revival as neoconservative economics, was solidly based and wholly dependent upon the violent exploitation of colonial resources and native or imported slave labor, as well as the forcible maintenance of the indentured and subsistent wage labor in the home countries. Profits occurred in the free enterprise system solely because the profiteers were allowed, via the fascistic collusion of state, business, military, ruling elite, religious elites, to ravage people and environments without paying recompense or undergoing regulation. It also had whole continents of untapped natural resources, Asia, India, Africa, the Americas, to lavishly plunder without interference. Indigenous populations of these rich continents were massacred, enslaved, missionized, destroyed by imported diseases, or pushed further and further into uninhabitable areas, which they managed to inhabit through sheer grit, while the colonialists ripped off all the good land. Many colonized people fought back and sometimes won temporarily, but they could not hold out against the well armed imperial armies, especially in a mercilessly mercenary world in which no one cared if they were slaughtered or not, and few came to their aid. This is why the 18th century was the great heyday of laissez-faire profiteering. The world conditioned, the world conditions were optimal for global plunder, i.e., large-scale profit taking depends on these fascistic conditions. In the 20th century, the conditions were reversed. Rapidly dwindling and polluting resources and large-scale decolonized populations, often armed and ready to throw off the yokes of Western exploitation. In this, they are backed by world sympathy and also usually by the military and economic support of one world power or another. Even if the third world was completely depopulated, 18th century style laissez-faire profiteering could not be repeated for long. Due to their depletion by greed, many major world resources are due to run out, to disappear by the end of the 20th century. The most dwindling resource of all, it seems, is the brain power of neoconservative economists and those free enterprise capitalist apologists who fail or refuse to see the complete reversal of global conditions and instead suggest that the solution to the 20th century is to return to the 18th and 19th, the 18th and 19th centuries, that colonialist imperialist paradise of unobstructed plunder, slave trading, and labor exploitation. In fact, this is the good old days. In fact, the capitalist free market system is structurally and functionally incapable of working if it pays decent wages and provides full employment. This is why it must fight against worker empowerment through unionization. Evidence that free enterprise capitalism cannot work without one, fascistic control, and two, subsistence level wages lies in the global factory system itself. American corporate capitalism saved itself by leaving America, where unionized workers had fought for and won relatively high wages and decent conditions and fringe benefits, and setting up free trade zones throughout the so called third world, where, as always, free is a euphemism for fascistic control over workers' lives on and off the job and the payment of feudal system wages. Neoconservative economics is, in effect, the same old fascistic economics that have defined patriarchal exploit for profit social and moral systems from the beginning. The evolution of law and economics theory out of this mindset is inevitable, with human beings defined from womb to tomb as market commodities and all laws governing social conditions and relations rewritten to structure human life in terms of its market value. If we do not call this neo fascistic economics, perhaps neo pastoralist would let's see, if we do not call this neo-fascistic economics, perhaps neo-pastoralist would be appropriate, the breeding of human life for economic use and slaughter. What does this have to do with women, and in particular, American women? The overwhelming majority of starving, malnourished, and homeless people on earth are women and children. In the third world, millions of women and children and elderly people, also displaced by chronic war and related famine, are crowded into refugee camps. Refugee camps have become, in fact, a permanent mode of existence for millions of people, most of them women and children. In the Western nations, more and more children and women of all ages are huddled at the bottom of the wobbling economic ladder, ghettoized, pauperized, permanently stigmatized as refugees from an economic system that cannot even support its own premises, let alone support all its poor people. American women and children are joining these populations of poverty refugees in larger and larger numbers every year. According to the 1980 census, more than 15% of Americans lived in poverty. 13 million of these were children. This was before the Reagan administration's budget cuts. Since these cuts, at least 2 million more women have fallen below the government defined poverty level, and with them, more millions of children. As of January 1985, one out of every four American children lives in what is considered to be official poverty. Nearly 35.7% of the households headed by women are impoverished. Among Black families headed by women, 56.1% are impoverished. As of February 1985, there were 3 million estimated homeless people in America, a number exceeding the number of homeless during the Great Depression in the 1930s. There are now 25,000 homeless people in the streets of Chicago alone, an estimated 7,000 of these being children, and a burgeoning number of the adult homeless being women. The Chicago Physicians Task Force on Hunger in January 1985 described childhood malnutrition in that city so severe that the children suffered from anemia, hair loss, and bloating, i.e., official symptoms of starvation. They also documented an alarming increase in tuberculosis. Indeed, with the cutoff of medical funds and the closing of health clinics since 1980. Tuberculosis has grown to near epidemic proportions among the poor in many major U.S. cities, especially infecting women and children. Tuberculosis is always a sign of malnutrition. The Chicago's physicians task force called TB an objective marker of hunger. The mid an objective marker of hunger. For those that are watching on IG, you might have to log on to Cassandra-Floyd on YouTube because I'm timing out. In midwinter of January 1985, police were rounding up 600 homeless people a night in the streets of Boston. And let's see, and in Washington, D.C., capital of world capitalism, there are now between 5,000 and 10,000 homeless people walking the streets. For a while, some of the homeless for a while, some of the homeless got warm at night by huddling over the sidewalk gratings where heat escapes from the government buildings. The Reagan administration responded to this this free heat situation by spending thousands of tax dollars to build cement huts surrounded with sharp spikes around the gratings to ensure that no poor people would benefit from the escaping bureaucratic hot air. Demonstrations got the cement huts removed at more expense. Proponents of laissez-faire capitalism refer to the free enterprise system as the greatest enemy of poverty on the greatest enemy of poverty the earth has ever known. But as the free enterprise system is more and more unleashed in America in the 1980s, i.e., as it is freed from the governmental restrictions and compensatory social welfare programs specifically designed in the decades since the 1930s to ameliorate the social and economic ravages of 2 centuries of unrestricted free enterprise activity, the number of poor is increasing right here in America. Faced with the statistical evidence of the increase of poverty and real hunger in America during the past 6 years, the administration's answer is to 1, insist that poverty is not a serious problem in America, and 2, scrap all social welfare programs, and 3, turn the problem of a few unfortunates over to private charity. This, although although all the private charity organizations in America have long ago publicly stated that the load is so enormous that they are not capable of handling it, even with the welfare system still running. But the final solution to the poverty problem in America is officially to deny that it exists or to blame it on lazy women and children. As Ruth Legger Sivard pointed out, the poverty statistics affect more than the poor, and not only by wasting human resources. Large numbers of poor and unemployed people in a society will pull the whole working class wage level downward and weaken the bargaining positions of working people vis-a-vis employers. Millions of working women in America are just one notch above the official poverty level. They must accept subsistence wages, unhealthy working conditions, and chronic on-the-job harassment for fear of losing employment altogether. Sweatshop conditions are returning to major American cities, Los Angeles, Boston, New York, where unlicensed substandard garment shops are springing up by the hundreds, where employers can get away with employing poor women up to 16 hours a day, 7 days a week without overtime, minimum wage rates, unemployment insurance, or even legal safety conditions. All workers are threatened. The entire standard of work life plummets downward. The entire high-tech electronics industry in America, the vaunted leading edge of our economic recovery, is predicated on employing large numbers of immigrant women, 40%, in chemically hazardous jobs at average wages that are among the lowest in American industry. But these conditions are the only alternative for millions and millions of American women, short of total poverty, including homelessness. Let me see how many pages I have left in this chapter. Ooh, many. Okay, so yeah, I'm gonna keep going. We got about 4 or 5 pages left. As a matter of fact, excuse me while I take a drink. Don't judge. Since 1980, the American divorce rate has fallen noticeably. Fundamentalists think this means Americans have returned to God and the family. But more likely, it means that American women see less and less chance for economic survival for themselves and their children outside of marriage. Since 1980, reported incidences of wife beating and child abuse have notably increased, i.e., the economic pressures holding all these marriages together are also increasing the violence within the American family. The average American woman works almost twice the hours and receives a little more than half the pay of the average American man. This fact has become a feminist cliche. If housewives were paid for their domestic work alone, they would earn $17,000 a year. This too has become cliche. In lieu of payment, the average white middle-class American homemaker is patted on the head and praised for her priceless work, a woman's work that is so important it can't have a price tag put on it. Can't have a price tag put on it. This baloney comes from men who have deliberately constructed a world in which all power over life and death is a function of money, of ascertainable wealth, period. The world of male power that is economically established on the fact of women's unpaid labor, but millions of married women accept this baloney and the patronizing head pats because they see very clearly that unpaid labor within a marriage is still better than most of the alternatives, i.e., the effect of increasing poverty, especially of the feminization of poverty, is to force new generations of women into accepting the old traditional terms of patriarchal marriage. Oh my God. Whoo. American mainstream feminism offers of equality within the system becomes meaningless within a rotten system. A patriarchal, fascist economic system ontologically predicated upon the exploitation of female labor cannot possibly offer huge numbers of women anything but two choices: economic enslavement inside of marriage or economic enslavement outside of marriage. A third choice is total poverty. It is women, in fact. Oh my God. It is women, in fact. It is the fact of women's labor that presents the most unanswerable challenge to the theoretical and practical claims of free enterprise economics. Very simply, it is the accumulated, come on. God damn it. Very simply put, it is the accumulated days, years, and centuries of women's unpaid and poorly paid labor that utterly refutes the astoundingly simple-minded notion that hard work equals wealth. If hard work equaled wealth, all the world's women would be quite rich. But clearly, the world's women are not rich. In The Anatomy of Freedom, Robin Morgan quotes the United Nations statistics presented by UN Secretary Kurt Waldheim in his official report to the UN Commission on the Status of Women in 1982. Quote, while women represent half of the global population and a third of the labor force, they receive only 1/10 of the world income and own less than 1% of the world's property. They also are responsible for 2/3 of all the working hours on Earth. End quote. People who put in 2/3 of the world's working hours and receive in return 1/10 of the world's income should have something to say about the idea that hard work equals wealth. They should have something very interesting to say to the neoconservative enthusiasts who insist hard work is rewarded and only the lazy are poor. The bitter truth is, under 4,000 years of patriarchal exploit for profit economics, the women of the world have worked long and hard, often under the worst necrophilic conditions, to keep the human race minimally alive. In return, we receive mostly dismal statistics signifying not reward, but straight ripoff. As Robin Morgan underscores in The Anatomy of Freedom, all those major issues labeled world problems are in fact women's problems. Some cultures traditionally give all their protein to men. In famine and other crises, food goes first to the male armies. It is women who are expected to stay alive on nothing, to feed infants and toddlers from their bodies as well, while gathering and preparing some kind of sustenance for everyone else, usually in terrain stripped of all nourishment. Over 90% of the world's refugees are women and children. The world's poor are overwhelmingly women and children. And this means that the most of the world's health problems, the problems of illiteracy and child abuse, are also women's problems, as is the problem of old age, of being old, and caring for the old. The major problems facing the world today are women's problems. Yet, as Morgan notes, the male experts, world analyzers, the world developers, the world planners, continue to list these problems in a secondary category labeled women's issues, i.e., co-signed to the dustbin. Even war, the glamorous male issue, is a woman's problem, for global female energy keeps going into the sustaining of biological life in the face of man's technological preoccupation with death. And it is man's preoccupation that gets all the funding. It is obsessive preparation for war that drains off all the resources of will and energy needed to continue life. It takes almost 10 months to make a human body. It takes a fraction of a millisecond to destroy one. Apparently, war-oriented males feel this gives them a technological superiority over women, although all of the superiority is on the side of death. Morgan also discusses how technological development, spearheaded by Western, predominantly American male experts, sets out at the very beginning to destroy third world women's traditional farming, craft, and marketing systems by turning over all the new machinery and development plans, the urban factory and rural agricultural technologies to the indigenous men. Only men are trained to use the new high-powered machinery. Further, for the convenience of the machines, land is reallocated, the women's horticultural plots confiscated and turned over to men for large-scale, often one-crop farming. Or the men are siphoned into urban factory centers, splitting not only families, but whole cultures based on rural cooperative market systems run by women. The new industrial power is put in the hands of men, and the rural villages degenerate into company towns, virtually run by multinational corporations who even get tax credits for doing so. Morgan describes contemporary third world developmental programs as neocolonial, merely a suave continuance of the old raw colonial style, with the developers manipulating indigenous males into bargains made between men over the heads of women. Quote, one of the most consistent inconsistencies of man's neo-colonial approach is that where a local tradition is in the self-interest of women, such as matrifocal land ownership or boutique industry controlled for generations by females, man overrides this tradition in the name of progress, by where a local tradition is deleterious to women. Genital mutilation practices as rites of passage, or protein being considered a dietary taboo for women. Man recognizes this tradition, expresses regard for it, and incorporates it into his plan for progress. End quote. Of course, this is not an inconsistency at all, but the classic imperialist ploy of dominating and manipulating a people by giving the men power over their women. Ideological power backed up with technological power, whether in the form of rifles or grain harvesters or textile factories, i.e., men dominate women via superior technology. But this neo-colonial maneuver not only usurps and destroys women's ancient skills and independence, it also turns a traditionally female-based communal cooperative system into a male-dominated wage and profit system. Thus, whole, once once self-sustaining, self-articulating cultures are systematically redesigned into company towns. Self and the males collecting the profits are not indigenous men, we may be sure, but the managerial elite of multinational corporations. Multinational corporations. Hopefully that's not too loud. Seeing this process at work again and again can reinforce women's deeply ingrained hostility to technology, because in our bones, we know how all machinery has been used against us as weaponry. But as Morgan points out, and as we have tried to show in our discussion of women's Neolithic culture, women developed most of today's technologies. Ceramic, textile, and food processing were all women's inventions, and early industries, medicines and drugs, writing, printing, agriculture itself was produced by women. It is not technology per se that is the enemy of women, but a specifically male dominated use of it and a specifically male dominated system, i.e., the patriarchal exploit for profit fascistic economic system. Women's global task today is not to fight technology, to is not to fight technology, to smash machines or return to Stone Age handwork. Rather, we must study how most modern and helpful technologies can be used within the communal cooperative systems, not to the profit of the few, but to the benefit of the many. Technologies themselves are not politically or economically biased. They can be plugged into any system. Yes, they can be plugged into any system. They don't have to be profit making in order to work. It is people who must reorient and redesign our heads, our hearts, and our social matrices to the technologies, so that the technologies can be plugged into cooperative life sustaining systems rather than competitive profit and power making systems of the past 4,000 years. And this reorientation and redesigns means reactivating rather than destroying women's traditional communal cooperative patterns. And this means indigenous males everywhere refusing to be co-opted by global corporate development system into betraying the traditional women's cooperative cultures. Y'all ain't hearing, this is preaching that's happening. You hear me? Listen, And this reorientation and redesign means reactivating rather than destroying women's traditional communal cooperative patterns. And this means indigenous males everywhere refusing to be co-opted by the global corporate development system into betraying the traditional women's cooperative cultures, but in their practical organization and in their spiritual philosophical orientation, which was, let's see, excuse me, both in their practical organization and in their spiritual philosophical orientation, which was from the beginning, the people first. Everywhere refers not only to men of the third world. The global corporation system is planning free trade zones for the Bronx and also for a 200-mile strip along the Mexican-U.S. border. And as Paul Virolo points out, Europe will be identified with the third world very shortly as a politically disempowered entity surviving as a colonial market and enterprise zone in the same relation to global corporate entities as Latin America is to the United States. Global means global, after all. And global control refers not only to war power, but to complete economic, social, and ideological power over every aspect of every human life with instantaneous electronic technological surveillance and reinforcement. As Morgan writes, no one would deny that the developing countries can use technological support, but such support must be keyed to the needs of all its citizens, not aimed at buying out one half of them, a feat accomplished by selling out the other half. End quote. Whew. Men worldwide must learn that every time they sell out their women or their women's communal systems, they are only buying a prolongation of colonial enslavement for themselves, or neo-colonial enslavement, the same specter riding a motorcycle. Come on, goddammit. Listen, we're going to have a discussion. Yeah, maybe another day. Anyway. Ha. All right, I hope y'all can hang with me. I got 3 pages left, okay? In his last book, A Grunt of Giants, R. Buckminster Fuller pointed out that since the early 1970s, humankind has possessed the technology to feed, clothe, shelter, and sustain and entertain all of us at a very comfortable level. The problem, Fuller said, is not the absence of the necessary and appropriate technology, but the obstructions to its fair distribution and optimal use. These obstructions are created by political, business, and religious institutions and ideologies which depend for their existence on maintaining these obstructions, i.e., national borders, exclusive markets, ideas of guilt and spiritual superiority as modes of both profit and identity. Technologies like earth, water, air, and mineral resources belong to the human race. The obstructing institutions, by possessing their manufacture and distribution as private property or nationalistic or ethnic property, thus are able to control human beings as manufacturers of necessities, of necessities control consumers of necessity. As manufacturers of necessities control consumers of necessities. As Fuller and others have long observed, the capitalist system itself, business, financial, investment systems that feeds on human need and activity, is a parasitical rather than productive system. Business co-ops and takes credit for human invention, what the inventions uh, what the inventors of the world create, not in a vacuum, but out of the accumulated knowledge and experience of the world's human labor and discovery, and then turns around and sells these inventions at a net profit for itself, but at the gross loss to the species. Capitalism monopolizes world technology and resources, distributes them only for profit, and in fact, as a system based on calculations of greed rather than calculations of need, obstructs the existing and appropriate technologies from meeting the exigencies they would be able to meet within a radically different system of distribution and use. Fuller, certainly a master technologist, insisted that it was one, the capitalist market system, and two, nationalist politics, and three, religious ideologies of guilt and punishment, ontologies of spirit versus flesh. These three obsolete factors, which were alone keeping the adequate existing technologies from being mass produced, distributed worldwide, and plugged in immediately for the greater good of all. He acknowledged this might sound utopian, but against the only and inevitable alternative of mass extermination, he offered his suggestions and calculations as hardcore realism. It is not enough for Western feminists to fight for, quote, equality within a rotten system. Come on. For large masses of women to be exploited side by side with male workers on global assembly lines, paying subsistent assembly lines paying subsistence wages for women to be drafted into armies side by side with men so both can fight in corrupt imperialist wars against indigenous revolutions all over the globe. This is no victory for women, nor is the entrance of a few token femmes into the managerial levels and executive boardrooms of giant corporations. Both integrations are co-optations of female energy into the maintenance of obsolete and criminal systems. Powerful systems, yes, but nonetheless obsolete and criminal. Where women are allowed to share equally in their profits and advantages, we also share equally in their crimes and in their obsolescence. If the Soviet state capitalist system has become criminal and ontologically rigid under pressure from American-based private capitalism, this has happened largely because its ruling male elite stopped short of, in fact, reversed a total sexual revolution, leaving patriarchal consciousness intact while it attempted a communalist restructuring that can only succeed in terms of matriarchal matrifocal consciousness based on female sexual autonomy. Today, both major world powers are locked together in a male power dance. Both systems are trapped within the terms of their own patriarchal biases. One, control and profit via war, defense, security, and two, control and profit via labor exploitation, beginning with the exploitation of female reproductive labor and the dwindling resources of the earth. Continuous war and continuous energy exploitation have been the operating principles of patriarchal systems for 4,000 years, and no patriarchal system, American or Soviet or any of their satellites, escape criminal stigma of these operating systems. Women must reject the constant co-optive suggestion that we have only these two choices. The man's capitalism or the man's communism. God damn it. Come on. Come on in. Woo! Women must reject the constant co-optive suggestion that we have only these two choices, the man's capitalism or the man's communism. We must refute the constant divisionary suggestion that there is no precedence for a third choice, female-oriented, cooperative communalism against 4,000 years of Bronze to Nuclear Age patriarchy, we must set at least 300,000 years of female Stone Age precedents, during which time all the fundamental technologies and industries of human life were originated and elaborated to benefit all of life, including the psychic, meditative, spiritual technologies, which have never been improved upon, but instead have only been lost, literalized, or fascistically degraded by the world's patriarchal religions, baby. Remember that the great goddess was always a triplicity between all dualistic choices, all warring oppositions, stood her being, a third term, which mediated and synthesized the polarities into a new thing, an epiphany. The immanence of transcendence, the transcendence of immanence. The whole purpose of studying ancient women's religion and culture is to understand the great precedents for this third term, this third alternative choice, neither the man's fascism nor the man's communism, but a radical return to the female beginning, a truly radical cooperative communalism that was at the root of human consciousness and culture. It is necessary for all of us to conceive that this female-oriented, creative collectivism existed, so that we can begin to perceive how it can be brought into being again on this contemporary term of the spiral. To know it existed in the past is to give its future existence not only credibility, but empowerment. We need this confidence of precedence, not only as a core of spiritual vision, but as the core of our political vision as well. Only when we know truly and accurately what human beings have been and have done can we begin to envision both practical and numinous modes of future being and doing. William Ern Thompson talks about the critically important relation between history, ontology, and politics. He argues that historic extrapolation from an ontology of man, the terrestrial possessor and aggressor, leads to one kind of politics, while the extrapolation from an ontology of woman, the creator and the sharer of food, leads to quite another. In terms of, this is a quote, by the way. In terms of the sociology of knowledge, one can say that one's vision of the origins of human culture affects one's political behavior in contemporary culture. If one believes that weapons and killing are the foundation of human culture, then one is inclined to accept a split in which technologically superior cultures move forward, while inferior cultures are helped on their way toward extinction. Through triage, a new global scientific elite determines who will survive. And through sociobiology, we should be chosen to survive. If, on the other hand, one believes with Glenn Isaacs that food sharing is the primordial act which made us human, then the global crisis would generate a vision of compassion and sharing. Audrey's territorial imperative, man the killer vision, becomes the philosophical foundation and justification for a new authoritarian and technologically managed society. Isaac's vision becomes the basis for a totally different world culture of compassion, as the Buddhists say, for the suffering of all sentient beings. Oh my God. All of which is to say that we are what we think, and that our vision of the origin of human culture is simply another description of our perception of the present condition. End quote. The compassionate, food sharing definition of humanity, as we've shown, has precedence in the hundreds of thousands of years of matrifocal Stone Age culture. But of course, it is not a definition exemplified by women alone. Many men have embraced this definition, argued for it, propagated it, and given their lives for it. The greatest men have always embodied it. As that reasonable and mortal man, Thomas Jefferson, wrote in 1809, quote, "The care of human life and happiness, and not their destruction, is the first and only legitimate object of good government," end quote. Or in the words of the Argentinian poet and novelist Julio Cortázar, the moment comes when a truth becomes clear, a truth simple as it is wonderful, that of saving oneself alone is not saving oneself, or in any case, it doesn't justify us as human beings, end quote. That, my dears, is the end of chapter 50. We have 2 chapters left. The next, which is 51, of which is entitled The Magic Flight Home, I will be reading on Friday at 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So I would encourage you all to go ahead and purchase your book. This is all we got left. That's it. So purchase your book. For those who might have tuned in late, we are reading The Great Cosmic Mother, Rediscovering the Religion of the Earth. And we are on chapter 51 of 52 chapters. So we are nearing the end in preparation for the launching of the study group / workshop on the Great Cosmic Mother. I would encourage you all to go ahead. If you have not read the book, go ahead and start. Thank you so much, Brother Abasi, and all of those who tuned in. I would encourage you to go ahead and start watching or listening. You can go to my YouTube channel, which is Cassandra-Floyd, and start with chapter 1. Do it while you're washing your dishes. Do it as you're getting ready to go to sleep at night, while you're driving in your car, on your commute to work, or what have you. Start going ahead and get caught up in this book, because in a couple of weeks, we're going to start the workshop / book club on the Great Cosmic Mother, so that we can use it as one of the instruments available to us in real time to change the world. So with that, I will say this is Cassandra-Floyd, also known as the Rogue Black Girl, formerly known as Iyapo Ngina. I want to thank God, known as Jacqueline Jeanette Futch, for saying yes to my life when she could have said no, for whom I would not be able to be here sitting here talking to you about the miracle that is on the precipice of human existence. This is the countdown, baby. This is it. So I want to encourage you to tune in again on Friday at 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time for the reading of The Magic Flight Home, chapter 51 of The Great Cosmic Mother. I will see you again in a couple of days.